Last week, Sporting Kansas City sold left winger Daniel Salloi to Toronto FC for $1 million, or at least upwards to $1 million in general allocation money. Now, the move was of shock to Sporting Kansas City fans due to the transfer coming just around 48 hours before Sporting Kansas City kicked off the 2026 MLS season against San Jose Earthquakes, a game that didn't go great with Sporting losing 3-0. Now, not only were fans shocked by the move because Salloi had gone through all of preseason with Sporting Kansas City and looked really good in that preseason, partnering Dejan Joveljic, partnering Dejan up top in the attack. But Salloi had also been with Sporting Kansas City for quite a number of years. He'd been a homegrown player. And again, it was a shock to see him suddenly depart the club. Now, a lot of people have asked why Salloi was sold to Toronto FC. Well, the simple numbers or the simple facts are Sporting Kansas City got upwards, again, of $1 million in general allocation money with a player who was going to be out of contract at the end of the 2026 season, and Sporting having no options to bring him back next season on another deal, decided it was in their best interest to go ahead and get some cash for him rather than let him run down his contract. Now, over the years, under the Peter Vermes regime, Sporting Kansas City was absolutely terrible at keeping players or selling players off, I should say, when their contracts were coming to an end. Now, the general rule of thumb in European football is that when a player enters the last 24 months of his contract, teams will begin to look at either A, re-signing that player, or B, selling him off in the next couple of months. Sporting Kansas City, again under Vermes, although they were able to sell a few players, a couple for some large transfer fees, over the years traditionally would allow players, whether they paid a transfer fee for them or signed them as a free agent or got them in the super draft, they would let those players run down their contracts and leave on a free. Last season, at the end of the season, Sporting Kansas City saw 6 or more players leave because either they were out of contract or because the club decided not to take up their option because they hadn't had a great season. So all of those players, 6 or more players, left for absolutely zero after Sporting Kansas City had either paid a transfer fee for them or put a significant amount of money into them with their wages. So with this move, again, you might ask why. Well, this is good business by Sporting Kansas City. Yes, it affected the team going into match day 1. And, having Salloi there in San Jose, it could have changed the result because we saw Sporting Kansas City new head coach Raphael Wicki having to fill holes. And because of that, it was creating other holes in other parts of the pitch. Now, one of the things I've noticed about Salloi since I've come back from being a lapsed fan is that there's a lot of Sporting Kansas City fans who have been very critical of him, critical of his play, saying how much he had underperformed, his output wasn't good enough, and that he just wasn't a good enough player for Sporting Kansas City. There were lots of comments on social media about this, as well as comments about how Sporting Kansas City waited too long to sell Daniel Salloi. Now, Salloi turns 30 in July, so again, like I say, it's good business now because he wasn't going to sign a new contract. Obviously, David Lee had found out, Sporting Director David Lee, that is, had found out that Salloi wasn't interested in signing a new contract unless perhaps it was for a larger contract. He made $1.3 million last season, so perhaps he was looking for designated player money. But again, like I say, a lot of people saying he should have been sold previously because his output wasn't great, but that's not true at all. Salloi was a very strong attacking player for Sporting Kansas City throughout his career, and last season, although his numbers weren't what a lot of fans and critics would have liked them to have been, he still had a strong season with 7 goals and 4 assists. Now, you might say, well, 7 goals, that's not many for a left-sided attacking player, left wing. But remember, Kansas City were absolutely dreadful last season, scoring 46 total goals, 18 of which were scored by Dejan, 7 of which were scored by Salloi, which was the second most. I believe the next most goals scored by the team was Manu Garcia with 4. So Salloi did well with his goal scoring. He was right on top or right on target with his XG, which shows that he was finishing those chances that were being created. Sporting did not create a lot of chances last season. They weren't very good in the final third. Again, the 46 goals shows that. And they only had 10 players who got onto the score sheet. And with Salloi leaving, that means that 6 of those 10 players who got on the score sheet last season for Sporting Kansas City, well, they're now gone. Only 3 of those players that scored last season remain on the team: Garcia, Shapi, and Dejan. So with that, Salloi having 4 assists as well, fans criticizing his inability to create for Sporting Kansas City. He also tallied 21 key passes, which was about 4th on the team. With those assists, you've got to take that with a grain of salt, because with assists, you can create as many chances as you want, but if your teammates aren't putting those chances away, then you're not going to tally the assists. So the assists are more on the backs of those players who are taking the shots rather than the player who is creating it. So I think you have to understand that Salloi did put in a really strong season last year. Now, Salloi played left wing for Sporting Kansas City in 2025 for the most part. He would have played as a second striker this season, but if we compare his numbers in 2025 to the other left wings in MLS, well, how does he fare? Well, in terms of goals, Salloi was 5th in MLS in terms of left wingers. And if you want to talk about left wingers in MLS, this is a who's list of players. MLS has some great left wingers in the team, players who have had great careers in Europe and are now playing in MLS. Denis Bowenga, 24 goals. Emil Forsberg, 11 goals. Wilfried Zaha, 10 goals. Joseph Pantzel, 10 goals. Hirving Lozano, 9 goals. Son Heung-min, 9 goals. And then you have Salloi with 7. So those are some big names ahead of Salloi. We've got players who played at the top level in the Premier League, played in the Champions League. Son Heung-min played in the Champions League final. Daniel Salloi is a lifetime MLS player, and he's still putting up numbers to be 5th in left wingers. Now, again, a lot of people will say, well, that doesn't matter. He sucked, this, that, and the other thing. Again, I completely disagree with that. He can only be as so good as the players he has around him who are feeding him the ball, who are able to help him build this team. 11 players on the pitch, 1 player cannot carry a team. Even Lionel Messi, we see in Miami, he needs to have those pieces around him to be able to produce what he does in Major League Soccer. Now, a lot of the time, Salloi last season would have been tracking back to help that porous defense. Remember, Sporting Kansas City had the worst defense in Major League Soccer last season, giving up 70 goals while scoring 46. So a lot of the time, Salloi would have been tracking back, trying to help fill those holes and gaps. And to be honest, if you look back at last season, there were plenty of times when Kansas City were trailing 1 goal, 2 goals, 3 goals by the time they started getting their first goals of a game. So Salloi was not helped by his teammates, not helped by the low quality that the team had, and to be honest, could have had a really good season this year. Again, he looked really good in preseason, and that obviously impressed Toronto FC. They knew his contract situation, so they pounced on him. And in that first game for Toronto, he came off the bench, he got an assist, and he played pretty well. And according to sources, he has already triggered at least one of the clauses to see Kansas City get slightly more cash than what they originally agreed on. It was originally agreed $300,000 plus $700,000 in additional funds if he reached certain milestones, and apparently he's at least reached one of those milestones, maybe more. So, Sporting Kansas City selling Daniel Salloi. They didn't have a direct replacement for him. They did sign Taylor Calhera later in the day last week when he was sold. Calhera didn't play really he didn't play as a factor in the game against San Jose. He only came on in the 90th minute. And with Salloi gone, Sporting's high press, their high pressure, their counter pressure, their counter press, it was non-existent against San Jose. And I think not only was the players, or excuse me, the supporters shocked with Salloi's move to Toronto, I think the players were shocked. Perhaps a bit of a gut punch with the season kicking off just 48 hours or so after that trade was made. And taking such a significant player out of the equation, taking such a significant player out of the locker room, that's a massive blow to a team right before they start the season, especially once they've just gone through preseason with him. And expectations, at least my expectations, were that Kansas City could fight for that 9th place in the Western Conference to make the playoffs. Now, without Salloi, unless they get someone else in there to play as that second striker, because we saw just how fragile the squad is in that game against San Jose. And of course, there are going to be more players coming in. There are going to be more players coming. Lasse Berg Jonsson has signed. He's just waiting his paperwork, the transfer to go through his visa. And we're also seeing some defenders linked to the team and just waiting for some things to go through. This team is going to sign a couple more players. Will they be as significant as Salloi was to the team in both on the pitch and off the pitch? I don't know. It's going to be hard to replace that. And I think that loss to San Jose really showed that. But again, a player who gets unnecessary criticism from fans and a player who was far more significant to Sporting Kansas City and what they were going to do this season before he was sold. But like I said earlier, good business from David Lee for Kansas City to bring in some cash for a player who was out of contract at the end of the season, and something we weren't seeing from Sporting Kansas City in years past. Thanks, guys, for watching here on Drew FC on YouTube. Of course, please go over to my Substack where I write weekly, almost daily, about MLS and Sporting Kansas City. If you want an unfiltered, truly honest look at Sporting Kansas City and Major League Soccer, go over there and have a look. You can find the link in the show notes, and you can find everything that you want over there. Also, my social media handles are in the description, so follow me on social media to keep up with everything that I post. Thanks, guys, for watching. Okay, if you want to like, subscribe, and share, go for it. Don't worry if you don't want to. It's fine with me, as long as you're watching and educating yourself about Sporting Kansas City and Major League Soccer. Thanks, guys. See you soon.